Hello, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about the so-called fine-tuning argument of the universe being evidence of God. It's often described by many so-called atheists as the perhaps most difficult argument from religious people to deal with, because, as the argument goes, that if anything was different, then we wouldn't be here. And this, to a lot of people, um, gives some sort of credence to the idea that there was a designer. So let's look at one of the most famous atheists, past atheists anyway, Christopher Hitchens, and what he has to say about this.
At some point, certainly, we're all asked, well, which is the best argument you've yet come up against from the other side? And I think every one of us picks the fine-tuning one as the most intriguing.
The Goldilocks.
Yeah. Fine-tuning the 1 degree, one hair different, nothing. But even though it doesn't prove design, doesn't prove a designer, could all have happened without it. You have to spend time thinking about it.
So, you heard it there. Yeah, and a lot of non-religious people would agree with Christopher Hitchens that the fine-tuning argument is quite difficult to grasp. In the Goldilocks zone, if anybody's not familiar with this, it's not too hot, not too cold, not too big, not too small, not too much, not too little, just right, just in the middle. So, okay, now let's look at a clip of Alex O'Connor speaking with his friend, Unsolicited Advice, and what they have to say, how they set up this question.
Why are the constants of the universe so finely tuned? There are constants which govern the physical universe, things like the strength of gravity, the strength of the strong and weak nuclear force, this kind of stuff. Like, if these had different values, whatever it is, 1 part in 1 times 10 to the minus billion or whatever, the universe couldn't exist. It's just like balance on a knife edge. If gravity was slightly stronger, then the universe would have collapsed in on itself. If it was slightly weaker, then everything would have flown apart so fast that even atoms couldn't form. So there are 3 options here. The constants of the universe are so finely tuned because of chance, because of necessity, or because of design. Chance seems ludicrous because the odds are just so unfathomably small. Necessity seems maybe possible, but like there doesn't seem to be any like logical reason why something would like the strength of gravity would have to be what it is, and the only thing left there is design, which requires something like God. So by ruling out design as an atheist, how do you answer this question?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'd say that I share the intuition that this is thorny.
Really?
Like, yeah, and this it quite often gives me pause for thought.
Okay, so you heard both Christopher Hitchens, my first intellectual hero, I could say, and Alex O'Connor, the most popular philosopher on YouTube, talking about how it seems incredibly difficult to understand or to explain. So he said that it could be chance, necessity, or design. Well, let's start with design. So the idea that everything is so complex, so it needs a designer, a God, again, kicks the can down the road, because if there was a designer that could do this infinite complexity, of course, the designer then would be more complex than the design. And that would beg the question of who designed the designer. And if you say that the designer doesn't need a designer, but the universe does, well, we could save a step and say that, well, the universe doesn't need a designer. So it really answers nothing. And even if you reach this conclusion that there is a necessary prime mover needed logically, well, there is still nothing to say about the mind of this prime mover, or that he even has anything to do with humans at all. Necessity, I don't understand even what this would mean. It needs to be, this would be some sort of like intrinsicism, like the value in things. And this I've rejected quite a few times previously on the channel. So you can check those if you would like. And then chance. They say, well, it's just chance. And it's, if anything, as Christopher Hitchens said, and he said, if anything was just a hair difference, a billionth of a billionth part difference, then nothing would have existed. Well, it's not about chance, but it is true. It's basically to say that if things were different, then things would be different, which is a fact. And they say, well, imagine all the things that had to lead up. They had to be exactly as they were for me to be having this conversation and for you to be listening right now. Yes, if anything was different, then everything would be different. It's not about chance. It's just about the facts of the way things are. So, of course, yes, everything had to be exactly how it is or as it was for things to be exactly as it is. Everything in that preceding had to be that way if the things following it exist now. An analogy here would be if we look at, for instance, sports. Like, let's look at the Super Bowl, for instance. So let's look at some statistics, for instance, just from the last Super Bowl. All right, so there are tons of statistics here, right? The exact time where they scored and who scored and how many yards it was. Now, it's not important to know football at all. It's just that there's a lot of statistics in football, so I thought this would be a good example. Like, we could ask the question, for instance, like, what are the odds that the Chiefs would have had 12 first downs and the Eagles have 21? And so forth, and go down the line. And if I ask you a question like, what are the odds that all this would have happened? Well, you say, oh, it's like impossible odds. There's no way to predict this. And of course, this is just a small amount of statistics from one game. We would also need to take into account all the things that happened in the preceding games, in the playoffs and in the regular season. And then you could even talk about the preseason and the acquisitions and the trades that were made. And what are the odds that all of these people would have lined up and then they wouldn't get hurt, or so-and-so would get hurt, and then they would complete these passes in exactly these minutes for these, touchdowns or whatever it might be. Just from this one game, you see all the statistics here. I'm going to close this now. So if we imagined, like, thinking, well, this is what happened. You look at all these statistics, and of course we could add more statistics. We could talk about like the amount of steps that each player took, and we can even talk about like the exact angle, like how many times did they take a step at 18 degrees to the left before then backtracking a little bit. Or you can imagine the statistics would be endless that you could create. And then after you had the results of all this, and you had the compilation of the statistics, you could then say, well, what are the odds of this? Like, it's too great for it just to be chance. There had to have been like a designer. Well, that doesn't make any sense, obviously. The statistics were what they were because everything was the way it was. If things were different, then the results would be different. This is the same thing with the universe. Of course, everything had to be exactly the way it was for me to be living and telling you exactly what I think about the fine-tuning argument right now. There are just so many things, and to say that what are the odds of it, it's chance, it's just too great, because if anything was different, we wouldn't be here. Well, of course, that's the way it is. In the same way, the Super Bowl wouldn't have ended the way it did if anything was different preceding that. It has nothing to do with chance. It just has to do with the way it is. It's just a metaphysical fact of what happened. In order for now to be now, everything that preceded it must have been the way it was. If everything that preceded now was different, well, then now would be different too. So I really don't understand the argument of fine-tuning. In Alex O'Connor, when he says that chance just seems too great, and like he and Christopher Hitchens, they would say that this seems to be the best argument, or not the best argument in the sense that they now want to believe in God, but the argument that they say gives the most pause or cause for concern or uncertainty or whatever you want to say. like I explained, it has nothing to do with chance. It has to do with the way things are. And of course, if anything was different, then now would be different. So this has been me actually thinking today. If you think I was doing a bad job, let me know, and I'll see you in the next one.